A small mom and pop landlord was tricked by a lawyer tenant who used their home as a drug house. I'm Tony, and this is Real Estate Investing and Landlord News.
I had no idea he was living downstairs. It looked like a homeless camp.
Police would confiscate these canning jars and 14 pounds of a chemical psychedelic drug called DMT, one testing positive for heroin and fentanyl.
I've never dealt with that before, and I had a panic attack. I turned around and I told the contractor, I said, get out of the house now.
Other snapshots from inside tell the rest of the story.
A lot of needles, blow torches.
Mahoney said there were hundreds of needles all over the house.
The table had, a whole pile of marijuana on it, had a spoon, had a syringe that's ready to, it looks like it's about ready to go into someone's vein. It's loaded with something in it.
The kitchen had no food in it, just chemicals. And after police took evidence, Mahoney was left with the cleanup.
All right, so I have an interesting article for you today, and it's coming out of my home city of Omaha, Nebraska. Now, this is an interesting story because it tells you a little bit about why I am a strong proponent of just very good tenant screening, okay? Background investigations, credit checks, full credit reports, everything, okay? I don't believe that you should just take somebody's word for it and then put them up in your unit. You need to make sure that person is able to pay the rent, make sure that person is a good enough tenant that they don't have a history of evictions or a history of tearing people's properties up, right? And in this case, this landlord in Omaha actually got screwed over by a tenant who was a lawyer. Now, you would think a person who is a lawyer, they make good money, they have a good career, steady income, right? Well, that's not the case in this situation. It looks like this person is either a drug addict or a drug dealer, okay? And there was a lot of shady stuff going on in this rental property after they rented it to this person. And so now they have to sit there and pay for the cleanup of a complete mess, okay? So before I get into the article, go ahead, hit the like, subscribe button, maybe leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. So have you ever put a tenant in one of your units before without doing proper tenant screening? And what was the result of that? I've heard all sorts of nightmare stories from other small mom and pop landlords who, they took the word of a person and then they got taken advantage of. And I know that this happens, right? But when it comes to a small landlord in particular, somebody who owns maybe one property, that can put you out of business. It can put you out of business and result in you losing a ton of money. Now, obviously, the bigger the landlord, the more likely they are to do proper tenant screening. So that's why, this story, it's more impactful for those who maybe are accidental landlords or maybe those who own one property. Now, I've even had a friend, a close coworker, who rented a property out to someone based upon just knowing them, and he had to go through a awful eviction and they tore his property up. And he actually knew these people. They lived in the same town as him, and he thought they were trustworthy. Well, he can't trust anybody, it seems like, right? But anyway, let's get into this article. This article is coming from ketv.com, and it says, Landlord in disbelief, cleaning up after psychedelic drug bust. An Omaha lawyer charged with cooking up drugs. He's the nicest kid you've ever met in your life. And that's a quote from the landlord. He's saying that the lawyer was the nicest kid they ever met in their life. And basically, he took advantage of these, I'm assuming, elderly landlords. And, well, let me get into the article and tell you what happened. An Omaha landlord is gutting his one-bedroom rental house after Omaha police busted a major psychedelic drug manufacturing operation there. John Mahoney owns the house in the Florence area, and he and his wife Stacy live next door. Me and my wife, it's hard to get over because we try to help people. I've done that my whole life, said Mahoney. In September, he rented the home to an attorney he's known for about 4 years after he had him draw up some legal papers for him. He's the nicest kid you've ever met in your life. Sweetest kid. Everybody that met him said he was the nicest kid ever, said Mahoney. The tenant was 34-year-old Jonathan Lawler, an Omaha attorney whose private practice was last listed in the Blackstone area. So, sounds like we have a nice, basic case of a small mom and pop landlord who lived right next door to the rental property that they were renting out to this guy, right? They had this lawyer draw up some legal paperwork for them, so they knew him and they trusted him, but it doesn't sound like they went through the normal screening process. Now, you can know and trust somebody, and that's perfectly fine. Co-workers, acquaintances, etc. I don't recommend renting to friends and family. I don't personally believe that's a good idea ever. But let's say this person is a coworker, acquaintance, whatever. In their case, he's an acquaintance. He's done work for them before, and they trust him. But my whole thing is trust but verify. Basically, yes, we will rent this place to you. You have preference over everyone else, but we're still going to go through the regular screening process. So we need to have proof of income. We, make sure that you make 3 times the monthly rent. We need to do a background and credit check on you, right? We're going to call up your well, I guess in his case he owned a private practice, so we can't call up his employer because he is his own employer, right? But we need verification basically that you are making the income that you are making. If that's bank statements or tax statements or whatever, then so be it. But we're not going to cut corners on you. Okay, we're going to call up your previous landlords, make sure that they say that you were 100%. And if everything is right, then you can still rent our place. But otherwise, yeah, that's just not going to happen. We can't give you a handout. We can't. And we're putting ourselves at risk. And that's exactly what these landlords here in this story did. They put themselves at risk, took a chance on this guy, and he screwed them royally. Mahoney said the first month of the living arrangement was great. Mahoney visited the rental house almost daily and was working on making improvements for the next tenant. He said Lawler told him he was only staying for a few months because he was in between houses and went through a divorce. The two spent many evenings talking, and Mahoney said he felt like Lawler was a friend. He said he never saw Lawler leave for work, but he was kind to neighbors and had 2 dogs, which he loved. And then you realize he's got some issues, said Mahoney. Mahoney said Lawler paid rent the first month, but then things got sketchy. He said Lawler would anger quickly, pick fights, and avoid him. His mom came and paid his rent. Then last month he couldn't pay his rent, said Mahoney. So yeah, they quickly noticed that, hey, this guy's attitude changed like that. Okay? His attitude changed fast. And he couldn't pay his own rent. He's got his mom paying his rent. At least he had somebody there who was able to pay his rent. So, that's a big problem when we're talking about somebody who's a lawyer who should be making decent money. Now, I realize he's going through a divorce. Now, for those who don't know, they said that this house is in the Florence area of Omaha, right? And that's a older area in northeast Omaha. And honestly, it's very, very shady part of town, in my opinion. Not the worst part of town by any means, but it's very close to some very bad parts of town. So the rentals up there, they don't usually rent for super high amounts. Just keeping that in mind, this guy probably didn't have much money. And, if that's all he could afford, even going through a divorce, he should have been able to get a better part of town than that. But, once the landlord started noticing that he was having issues with this guy, that's exactly when, you realize, uh-oh, maybe I screwed up here. Maybe I should have done more thorough investigation of this guy's history. Mahoney said security cameras showed people coming and going from the home at all hours of the night. In mid-October, Mahoney went into the home with a contractor to work on improvements. He said a strange man was inside the home, and that's when Mahoney discovered a drug cooking operation. I knew something was wrong when I looked down and saw the blower and the heat lamp and thought, this was not right, said Mahoney. He left the home and called 911. That's smart. In the meantime, he said the man in the house had grabbed 4 quart-sized glass jars full of a dark liquid and fled the home. Police found them in a nearby woods and arrested 47-year-old Christopher Mayu for tampering and possession. Unknown to Mahoney, Mayu had been living in the basement of the rental home. So basically, the lawyer tenant was subleasing without the owner's permission, okay, the basement of the home to this guy who obviously is cooking drugs up in the house. Now, I'm not saying that the lawyer himself was involved with this drug operation. Maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But maybe he was a drug addict, whatever. But there were people coming and going from the home all hours of the day and night. And it said earlier in the article that the owners of the property lived right next door. So they didn't notice that, there was a ton of strange activity. They should have taken notice that, there were other people living in the home. I mean, it would have been pretty obvious. I notice everything that happens to all my neighbors, at least. I'd be like, hey, there's cars parked there that I don't recognize, especially if you own that house and you're renting it out and you don't recognize the people who are staying there. That's a huge, huge red flag. Now, fortunately, you did the right thing. You called the police. The police, you recognize, hey, this is a drug operation. We had to call the police, and they went in there and took care of it. Now, they got this situation though, where they got to get this drug operation where they were actually manufacturing drugs in their house. They got to get this cleaned up, and from what I've heard, that sort of thing is not expensive. And I feel bad for him because here you are, you're trying to help this guy out. Obviously, he's going through a divorce, and you think you have a pretty decent tenant, a tenant who is a lawyer, mind you, right? And what does he do? He trashes your house and turns it into a drug den. Okay, and let me skip down a little bit, and it says here the jars contain 14 pounds of a homemade chemical hallucinogen known as DMT, or dimethyltryptamine. Omaha police believe the drug was being produced to hook psychedelic users into other drugs like fentanyl. One jar tested positive for heroin and fentanyl. DMT is a potent hallucinogen. It's like psychedelic mushrooms, but on steroids, said Lieutenant Steve Fornoff, commander of the Omaha Police Narcotics Unit, who wants to warn people that the drug is in our area and it's been discovered in a large quantity. After police removed all evidence, Mahoney was left with a toxic mess to clean up. He said estimates from cleanup companies to make his house safe again ranged from $7,500 to $12,000. And there you go, right there, okay? As much as 12 grand to get this toxic mess cleaned up. Not to mention, any property damage done by the guy, the fact that he wasn't paying you rent, etc. You're out thousands of dollars trying to help somebody. Trying to help somebody. Now, here is what I would have done, right? Like I said before, I would have done proper tenant screening. If the guy, if his background or anything said that he had a drug problem, I wouldn't have rented to him. I don't want druggies up in my place, okay? And if you had a good tenant in there who was paying you market rate rents, then you would be up. You'd be making a profit right now. But instead, here you are stuck with a $12,000 bill because you tried to help somebody out and you didn't do proper tenant screening.